You ready to hear some scary stories? These stories are from More Bones, scary stories from around the world. The Werewolf in the Forest, Eastern Europe. One morning, a poor man was walking in the forest when a weasel scooted across his path. The man was so startled that he jumped and yelled. The weasel was so startled that it dropped what it was carrying and raced into the underbush. And what did the weasel drop? A ring, a shiny golden ring. The man was dumbfounded. Where in the world did a weasel find it, he wondered. He picked up the ring and wiped the weasel's spit off with his ragged sleeve. He could see that the ring was made of gold and was covered with intricate carvings. On the inside, strange letters were engraved. The man was puzzled. He turned the ring around and around in his hand. Never had he seen anything quite so valuable, quite so mysterious. Then he remembered a tale his grandmother had told him long ago. It had to do with rings granting wishes. But what were the magic words? As he slipped the ring onto his finger, he suddenly remembered. He could almost hear his grandmother's voice saying, "Ring of gold, ring of old, do my bidding as you're told." He repeated her words out loud and tested them. "Bring me a bag of gold coins," he said. Out of nowhere, a small leather bag appeared and landed at his feet. He reached for it with trembling hands. Could his wish really have come true? He tugged it open and was astonished to see the gold coins inside. He slipped the ring and the coins into his pocket and ran out of the forest, across the fields, into the village, and to the marketplace. There he bought a new coat for himself, a new shawl for his wife, and enough food to last him for weeks. Did this make his wife happy? Not at all. Where did the money come from? She demanded. All he would say was, "It's a miracle." Well, his wife was determined to solve the mystery. She nagged him about it every day, and when he refused to tell her, she pretended to weep. "You must have stolen it," she cried. She knew very well that he was not a thief, but she also knew he'd be horrified to be called one. "A weasel gave me a magic ring," he said. "A likely story," she scoffed. "You expect me to believe that?" He reluctantly led her to the chest where he had hidden the ring. The moment he opened the lid, she grabbed the ring and made a wish. "I want a huge house," she said. Nothing happened. She tried again. Still nothing happened. "You fool," she said. "When you stole the coins, you must have stolen that ring too." The poor man couldn't stand having his wife think such terrible thoughts about him. So he told her the magic words. "Is this the way you do it?" she asked. "Ring of gold, ring of old, do my biddings as you're told." "That's right," he said, never expecting that she would turn a wish against him, but she wanted that ring for herself. She repeated the magic words and added something horrible. "Turn my husband into a werewolf and send him to the forest where he can howl night and day." Zap! The man vanished and the werewolf materialized in front of her. It immediately began to howl and leap out the window, pulled into the forest by the magic wish. The villagers were terrified when they saw the werewolf. No one dared set foot on the street after sundown. At night, they barred their doors and shivered every time they heard the anguished howling. Meanwhile, the poor man's wife was living in luxury. She now had a large house, elegant clothes, servants, jewels, and food fit for a queen. No one could imagine how she suddenly became so rich. Of course, her husband knew. Even though he was in that werewolf's body, he could still think like a man. He hated being a werewolf and realized that nothing could help him return to his former life except for magic. So, one night when the moon was full, he left the forest to look for that gold ring. When he saw his wife's magnificent new home, he didn't know which room was which. He paused by each window until he heard her snoring. Now he knew that he had found her bedroom. It was all he could do to keep from howling, but he didn't want to awaken her. So he clamped his mouth shut and leaped through her window. In the moonlight, he could see the very chest in which he had first hidden the ring. It stood by the foot of the bed, close to his sleeping wife. He took the handle in his mouth and slowly pulled the lid open. To his horror, the hinges creaked. His wife tossed and turned in her sleep, but soon she was snoring as loudly as before. He rooted around in the chest with his nose, and when he uncovered the ring, he grabbed it with his teeth and leaped out the window. The magic words that rang through the forest that night sounded more like barks and howls, but at last the ring understood. The werewolf disappeared. Zap! And the poor man stood in his place. He picked up the ring and thought hard for a moment. Ring of gold, ring of old, do my bidding, as you're told. He made his wish, then tossed the ring as far as he could into a tangle of bushes. As the man walked out of the forest, a donkey started to bray in the distance. When he reached home, a donkey ran to meet him, braying furiously. I thought you would rather be a donkey than a werewolf, he said to a wife. And then he entered the house smiling. That's where they turned him into a werewolf. And there's the wife. You ready for another spooky story? The next story we're going to read is The Severed Head from Persia. The king of Persia was a tyrant, a terrible man who loved nothing better than chopping off heads so he could watch the blood flow. Everyone kissed the ground before him and sang songs in his honor. How could they do otherwise? But still the king was not happy, for his body was covered with open sores and his head throbbed daily and night. One evening he pushed aside his silver goblet and his golden plate. "What care I for food and drink," said he, "when my life is slipping away?" His trusted advisor spoke soothingly to the king. "Somewhere there must be a physician who can cure you," he said. "I will send forth messengers to every corner of the land." In truth, the advisor was so evil that he had no sympathy for anyone, but he knew that keeping his job and his head depended on how well he served his king. So the advisor sent a message far and wide. Anyone who could cure the king would be rewarded with gold and jewels, but woe to those who tried and failed. Most physicians were reluctant to try. They knew that the king was already been given ointments, herbs, and potions of all sorts with no success. A few physicians came forth hoping for vast riches. Their medicine did not help the king. So what did he do? He called for his executioner. The physician's head soon rolled across the palace floor. The king was about to give up hope when he learned that a wise old physician had come to the city, someone who knew more about medical science than any other man in the world. He could identify all the plants on earth and knew their effects on the human body, good or ill. The king summoned him to the palace, and the old man kissed the ground in front of the king's feet. "Rise," said the king, "and tell me if you can cure me." The physician could see the open sores in the king's hands and face, and he noticed how often the king rubbed his sobbing forehead. "Certainly," said the physician, "and you need not to drink any vile medicines or smear any ointments on your skin." The king was amazed. "How can that be?" he asked. "If it pleases your majesty," said the physician, "I will return to the inn to prepare a cure. Tomorrow I will bring it to the palace." For the first time in years, the king had high hopes. So did the old physician. He had never failed before. Why would he fail now? He told the innkeeper that he was about to cure the king, but the innkeeper was horrified. "No one can cure him," he whispered. "You must flee the city at once." The physician just shook his head and smiled. "Fear not," he said. "I shall be richly rewarded." The innkeeper turned aside, muttering to himself, "How could such a wise man be so foolish?" Back in his room, the physician took a piece of wood and old-fashioned it into a mallet with a hollow handle. Then he took a handful of herbs, some blades of dried grass, a few slices of gnarled roots. He ground them into a fine powder, mixed them with the bubbling liquid, and filled the handle of the mallet with this strange concoction. Then he sealed the handle. The next morning the physician hurried to the palace and kissed the ground before the king. "Rise," said the king, "and cure me." "If it's your pleasure to ride your horse," the physician said, "I would like you to mount it now. With your right hand you can grasp the handle of this mallet. Then use it to hit the ball that is lying on the sand. right up to the ball and keep hitting it ahead of you until your palm gets sweaty. When it begins to tingle, you will know that the medicine has seeped out of the mallet and into your hand. Then you must bathe and go to bed." The king did exactly what the physician asked, and when he awoke the next day, he was overjoyed. He was cured, his skin was clear, and his head no longer throbbed. He sent for the physician, poured gold coins into his hands, and insisted that he sit in the place of honor beside the royal throne. Now this was the very place where the vizier had always sat, giving the king advice. As the days went by, the physician continued to sit there, entertaining the king with stories of his travels. The vizier became more and more jealous. When the physician returned to the inn one evening, the vizier asked the king's permission to speak. "Your Majesty," he said, "you are in grave danger. If the physician can cure you by putting something in your hand, he can kill you just as easily. I think he's a spy from another kingdom. When he has gained your trust, he will kill you." "How can you be suspicious?" shouted the king. "Wasn't he the only man in the world who could cure me?" "I'm thinking only of your safety," the vizier replied. First the king ignored the vizier, but each day he worried more. He watched the physician for signs of betrayal. He saw none, yet his fears grew. One morning, as the physician sang a song in the king's honor, the king suddenly turned cold and cruel. He beckoned his executioner and pointed to the old physician. "Off with his head," he ordered. The physician grew pale. "Is this the way you reward me for curing you?" "If you could cure me by putting something in my hand, then you have the power to kill me," said the king. "Spare me, and Allah will spare you," cried the physician. "Kill me, and Allah will kill you." But the king would not listen. The physician continued to beg for mercy, but finally he realized there was no hope. His legs felt weak and his hands trembled, but he asked for two last favors. "Will you grant me a day to arrange for my bureau and distribute my books of medicine?" asked the physician. "And will you grant me the favor of keeping my most precious book in your royal library?" "Only because you cured me," said the king, and he sent the physician back to the inn, guarded by 4 strong men. The next morning, the physician appeared at the palace looking old and weary, but he accepted his fate. After kissing the ground before the king, he showed him the precious book. "Why should I treasure it?" said the king. "It has special powers," said the physician. "If you want my head to speak to you after you cut it off, turn 3 pages of this book and read the 3 lines you see there. Then I will be able to answer any question you ask." The king was astonished. He had never seen a severed head speak. He eagerly reached for the book. "But first, my head must be pressed down on this tray, on which I have sprinkled a special powder. It will stop the bleeding." The king didn't hesitate for a moment. He ordered the execution to begin. A kindly king might have turned away from such a horrible sight, but not this king. He could hardly wait to see a speaking head. After the executioner had performed his grisly task, he pressed the physician's head on the powdered tray. Suddenly, the physician's eyes lit up, and the head spoke. "It's time to open the book." The king tried to turn the pages, but they were stuck together, so he licked his finger and tried again. Now he could turn the pages, but he found nothing written there. "Turn some more," said the head. The king licked his finger again and turned page after page. Still, he couldn't find no writing. He began to feel ill, so he asked his vizier to continue. The vizier began turning the pages, but so many were stuck he had to lick his finger again and again. He, too, began to feel ill. He stopped and lifted his hand in horror. It was purple. He looked up and saw the king was also turning purple, all the way up to his eyebrows. "This book is poisoned," the vizier cried, but it was too late. Both the king and the vizier tumbled to the floor dead. The physician's head smiled. "Just punishment for tyrants," it said, and the lights went out in his eyes forever. Executioner's hand right there. On to the next creepy little story. The Gruesome test from Japan. Suitors came from all over Japan to woo a beautiful maiden. First they fell in love with her, then they ran away. Some were heard screaming as they raced down the road. Suspicious neighbors spread rumors. They suspected that the maiden might actually be a goblin or a foxwoman. Her parents were mystified. Why did their lovely daughter terrify a young man? She was gentle, happy, and hardworking. She didn't complain when helping her mother around the house and never wasted a single grain of rice when she cooked their meals. What more could parents desire? Grandchildren? That's why the couple wanted their daughters to marry. Besides, the aging father needed a strong son-in-law to help him grow rice, and he needed him soon. Arranged marriages had been tradition for as many generations as anyone can remember, but long ago the father had decided to let his beloved daughter choose a husband for herself. One spring he began to regret his decision. He sat beneath the flowering cherry tree, watching the pink petals fall to the ground. Would his daughter's youth fade away as quickly as the delicate flowers? Just as he was losing hope that she would ever marry, a soldier came striding up to the house. "May I court your daughter?" asked the bold young man. The father liked his broad shoulders and muscular arms, good for planning rites. "Come right on in," he said, and he happily introduced the young man to his daughter. The maiden moved gracefully about the room, serving the soldier tea and rice. She seemed shy, speaking softly and lowering her eyes. The young man seemed smitten. When the meal was over, she accompanied him to the door and quietly invited him to come back. "But not until midnight," she whispered, "and knock lightly so you don't awaken my parents." He was surprised, but not half as surprised as he was when he returned that night. The moment he entered the house, she made a very strange request. "You must promise on your honor," she whispered, "that you will submit to the test of your love for me, and promise that you will never tell a living soul what that test is." The young man couldn't imagine what the maiden had in mind, but he agreed to remain silent. "On my honor, I will never tell." "Then wait here," she said. She slid open the paper screen to her room and closed it behind her. The soldier waited impatiently. When she returned, she was wearing a loose white garment. Oddly enough, the handle of a shovel poked out from under the hem. "Follow me," she whispered. They moved through the village under a cloudy sky with only fleeting glimpses of the moon. On such a night, ghosts were said to wander. The soldier followed the white figure ahead of him, careful not to awaken sleeping dogs. They slipped through the village streets to the woods beyond, hurrying down the dark road until they reached an ancient cemetery. When the moon emerged from the clouds, they could see old gravestones covered with moss and mold. Here and there, bamboo cups held wilted flowers. Weathered statues of gods stood guarded, protecting souls. The maiden stopped by a grave that looked quite fresh. She pulled forth her shovel and began to dig, flinging clods of dirt to one side. Then she dropped to her knees and swept aside the dirt with her hands. The soldier could see that she had uncovered a small coffin. Imagine his surprise when she lifted the lid, opened the white shroud, and tore an arm off the corpse inside. Then she clamped it in her teeth and took a large bite. "If you love me, you will eat what I eat," she cried, ripping the other arm of the corpse and tossing it to the soldier. He didn't hesitate. He took a large bite himself. Now he was even more surprised. He was eating a candy corpse made of sugar and rice flour. The maiden burst out laughing. "You're the only one of my suitors who did not run away. I want to marry a brave husband, and you are the one." You would think the soldier would laugh too. The maiden was not a monster after all, but he glowered at her. "Only candy," he said. "I thought you were giving me much more." He grabbed her shovel and began to dig up a real grave. This time it was the maiden who ran away screaming.